Welcome to the Patriot Radio News Hour. This is your host, Jason. I'm getting ready to do another day without Joe here at the Colorado studios. Just checking the gold price as we're getting on the air. Gold's down a little bit today. Silver's up again, $39.44 to the ounce. What else is there to say? I'm going to be selling gold and silver. I was going to bump those specials up, but since gold and silver finally kind of cooled off where they just aren't racing upward, I'm going to keep the specials from yesterday for one more day. Opportunity here if silver and gold continues to move up the way it has been. And we got $20 gold pieces, $3,495 for a $20 gold piece. And we still have the Canadian Maple Leafs, 25 ounces to the roll for $785. And what little bit of Silver Eagles we have left out of those sealed boxes, $810 to the roll. You call 800-951-0592, and we will get that into your hands. I've been running this content this week, the history of central banking and the enslavement of mankind. I'm going to go ahead and get a few minutes of that on this segment here. We're going to just roll this stuff because I got lots of people, what is that? It's Stephen Mitford Goodson. This is a book that he wrote some years ago, and then it was transferred over by one of his, somebody who really liked the content, because this guy that wrote the book, Stephen, died actually some years ago, and so they wanted to have it so you can kind of like a book on tape, but it's not a really thick book. It's not like Creature from Jekyll Island. You can get a lot of information. It's not as detailed as the Creature from Jekyll Island, but it covers more ground. It covers a lot more of the history, and there's a lot of facts in there that the Creature from Jekyll Island doesn't have. It's kind of a companion book almost in a lot of ways. Anyways, let's put this on, play a few minutes of it. We'll hit the break, and we'll do more on the next segment. Once again, this is the history of central banking and the enslavement of mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson.
These appointments were personally vetted by Napoleon. The new act also increased the bank's capital to 90 million francs. Napoleon was so suspicious and distrustful of bankers that he personally supervised the operations of the treasury, lest the secrets of his monetary policies leak out and be exploited by speculators. He was thus his own banker, who controlled both the creation and distribution of money and credit, to the chagrin of the international bankers, particularly the Rothschilds, who were virtually excluded from operating in continental markets. Napoleon made the franc the most stable currency in Europe. After France had abandoned the loan markets of the City of London, a fog of depression settled on its fraternity of bankers and usurers. In typical fashion, the English press began to stir up trouble for Napoleon. He was accused of having not observed the conditions of the Treaty of Amiens, which had been signed between England and France on the 25th of March, 1802. Relations broke down when Napoleon refused to sign a trade treaty, which would promote free trade and a modern-day version of globalization, and thereby force him to diminish the autarky and isolationism of his continental policy. England, under the direction of her international bankers, proceeded to bankroll Austria, Prussia, Russia, Spain, and Sweden, and duly declared war on France. The coalition forces exceeded 600,000. Napoleon could not muster even a third of that number, and would under normal circumstances have been compelled to secure a banker's loan in order to arm and feed them. On the 20th of December, 1803, he trumped the warmongers by selling Louisiana to the United States of America for £3 million. A brief period of peace and prosperity ensued. However, in 1806, a new coalition consisting of England, Russia, and Prussia, at the initiative of the last-named country, took to the field. Although the coalition forces were defeated at Jena on the 14th of October, 1806, Napoleon was forced to engage in a series of needless and senseless wars for the next 9 years in order to protect France and her new economic dispensation. He promulgated the Continental Blockade, whose objective was to destroy England's export trade, as he realized that England could not finance her imports and fund her allies at the same time. At the Treaty of Tilsit, signed on the 7th of July, 1807, on a raft in the middle of the Neman River in East Prussia, Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I agreed to an alliance which made them the masters of continental Europe. Alexander agreed to join Napoleon's continental blockade of England and to provide each other with mutual support in the event of disputes with other nations, and in particular the British Empire. At that time, France and Russia were the only two countries in Europe which were not on the usury system and were furthermore not indebted to the Rothschilds. They were therefore the only free and independent nations. However, a few years later, Russia started to violate the blockade. This action was premised on the fact that Russia, a producer of mainly raw materials, had very little industrial capacity and had been dependent on England for the importation of industrial products. Alexander was only prepared to continue with the blockade, subject to France supplying him with the industrial goods, which he had previously imported from England. France could not supply these goods, as England commanded the seas and there was no road or rail infrastructure in Europe at that time. Therefore, in order to enforce the blockade, Napoleon decided to invade Russia on the 24th of June, 1812, with an army of over 500,000 soldiers. Although he reached Moscow on the 14th of September, 1812, he found that it had been abandoned, and the subsequent winter retreat turned into a major disaster, with only 110,000 of his original army surviving. The following year, Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of the Nations, east of Leipzig, on the 19th of October, 1813. All
right, we'll have more of this on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Patriot Radio News Hour. That was Gold and Silver Specials, 800-951-0592. We'll be right back. Yeah, that's right. Napoleon, the one of the men fighting against central banking. When you see stuff about Napoleon, a lot of times he looks like the villain, right? But he was for his people. He was trying to give the citizens a more free and just society, and from all corners of Europe, they wanted to do everything they could to stop that. You can't have people getting what they want out of life, free to prosper as any other people, but that it is the truth. So we're listening to the history of central banking and the enslavement of mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. We're going to continue on with that. Just remember, we have rolls of silver maple leafs for $7.85 a roll. We have rolls of silver eagles for $8.10 a roll, and $20 liberties for not quite 7,000. It's going to be $3,495. Got lots of distractions today, lots going on today. So call us over at 800-951-0592. I've got most. I got the 20s here live. I've got the Maple Leafs and the Silver Eagles. I got them here. You literally could buy these and pick them up today if you wanted to. So give us a call. Order at 800-951-0592. Jack, let's play a little more.
After being banished to the island of Elba, situated between Corsica and Tuscany, Napoleon attempted to stage a comeback at the Battle of Waterloo in modern-day Belgium on the 18th of June, 1815. All the belligerents, England, Prussia, and France, were financed by Nathan Rothschild, with France receiving a loan of £10 million. After his defeat, Napoleon was exiled to the British island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he died under suspicious circumstances when he was still a fit man at the age of 51, on the 5th of May, 1821. An examination of Napoleon's remains has indicated that he almost certainly died of cyanide poisoning following chronic arsenic intoxication. In such a case, it would undoubtedly have been the work of a Rothschild assassin, which conforms to a pattern repeated consistently during the past 2 centuries of assassinating all leaders who propose, institute, or maintain systems of usury-free banking. As part of Napoleon's plan to assimilate Jews into French society, he issued a decree in 1808 ordering all Jews to adopt surnames and to use those names on all documents. Napoleon, in a letter to his younger brother Jerome, written in 1808, states, "I have undertaken to reform the Jews, but I have not endeavored to draw more of them into my realm. It is necessary to reduce, if not destroy, the tendency of Jewish people to practice a very great number of activities that are harmful to civilization and to public order in society in all the countries of the world. It is necessary to stop the harm by preventing it. To prevent it, it is necessary to change the Jews. Once part of their youth will take its place in our armies, they will cease to have Jewish interests and sentiments. Their interests and sentiments will be French." Achievements of the French state banking system. As part of the Code Napoleon, Code Civil de Francais, Napoleon introduced a new commercial code on the 21st of March, 1804. These economic reforms, which included substantially reduced taxes, quickly turned the French economy around and resulted in increased trade and the development of new industries such as cotton making and sugar beet, which were assisted by tariffs against foreign goods and low interest rate loans. The infrastructure was upgraded on a vast scale not only in France, but throughout Western Europe, with the construction of 20,000 miles 32,186 kilometers of imperial roads and 12,000 miles 19,312 kilometers of regional roads, almost 1,000 miles, 1,609 kilometers of canals, bridges, and dredging, and expansion of harbors such as Cherbourg and Dunkirk, waterworks and public buildings, such as the Gallery at the Louvre, all financed with interest-free money from the Banque de France. Napoleon also established an industrial board, which provided data and information to French industry, the Imperial University, which administered French education, specialized schools, or lycée, for the study of engineering, science, and technology, and professional schools devoted to midwifery, obstetrics, and veterinary science. Napoleon described these accomplishments to his Irish doctor, Barry O'Meara, on the island of St. Helena, and said that they were his most enduring monument. The Allied powers cannot take from me hereafter the great public works I have executed, the roads which I have made over the Alps, and the seas I have united. They cannot place their feet to improve where mine have not been before. They cannot take from the code of laws which I formed, and which will go down to posterity. In conclusion, we may consider some of Napoleon's achievements, which he communicated to his former chamberlain and constant companion for 18 months on St. Helena, Comte de las Casas. I inspired France and Europe with new ideas which will never be forgotten. France's finances are the best in the world. To whom does she owe them? If I had not been overthrown, I would have made a complete change in the appearance of commerce as well as of industry. The efforts of the French people were extraordinary. Prosperity and progress were growing immeasurably. Enlightenment was making giant strides. New ideas were everywhere heard and published, for I took pains to introduce science among the people. If I had been given time, there would soon have been no more artisans in France. They would all have become artists. A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind, by Stephen Mitford Goodson. Chapter 4. A Century of Struggle. Rothschild versus the People. Who hold the balance of the world? Who reign o'er Congress, whether royalist or liberal? Who roust the shirtless patriots of Spain, that make old Europe's journals squeak and gibber? Who keep the world, both old and new, in pain or pleasure? Who make politics run glibber all? The shade of Bonaparte's noble daring, Jew Rothschild, and his fellow Christian, Baring. Lord Byron, 12th Canto. Central Banking in the United States. As this section will show, all previous encounters which the United States has experienced with central banking have been very negative. During the colonial period, the American colonies created their own paper money. The first colony to do so was Massachusetts in 1691. Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and Maryland soon followed suit. They called their currency colonial script, or bills of credit. It freed them from the control of the English banks and enabled them to run their financial affairs in an inflation-free environment with few taxes. Throughout the colonies sustained, stable economic growth and prosperity were achieved, which would not have been possible under a privately run banking system based on usury. In 1763, American statesman Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, visited London, where he was shocked to observe slum conditions and the wide prevalence of poverty. When the British Parliament asked Franklin to explain the source of prosperity of the American colonies, he replied as follows: "That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial script. We issue it in proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay anyone." The following year, in 1764, the Bank of England introduced a currency bill which severely restricted the colonies' rights to issue their own money and forbade its legal tender status for the payment of private and public debts. Instead, the bank ordered them to issue bonds at interest and sell them to the Bank of England in exchange for English money. In the event, only half of the currency was remitted. As a consequence of this law, the economy of the colonies collapsed, and within 1 year, more than half the population became unemployed and destitute. The Stamp Act of 1765 was the last straw, but the abolition of the colonial currency was the primary cause of the revolution. One of the first tasks entrusted to the Second Continental Congress, which convened for the first time on the 10th of May, 1775, was to issue its own currency, largely to finance its war expenditures. A total of $241,552,788 was issued during the currency's existence. The Bank of England quickly responded. Hundreds of workmen were recruited, and soon millions of dollars worth of counterfeit banknotes were rolling off the printing presses and being shipped to New York. The continental dollar retained much of its purchasing power during the first 2 years of its issuance, but once the English counterfeit banknotes started to increase in circulation, its value soon fell away, and by 1780, $1 was worth only 2.5 cents. 15 years later, in 1790, the Bank of England mounted another similar operation, when it employed over 400 workmen in 17 factories in southern and central England to print the assignat, which was the currency of revolutionary France. The The assignat, which was backed by clerical lands, was in its initial stages successfully circulated as a means of exchange, and a significant portion of the national debt was repaid. However, by 1792, the massive infusion of counterfeit notes soon caused the assignat to plummet in value, and thereafter there was a brief period of hyperinflation. On the 14th of April, 1803, Napoleon Bonaparte introduced the government-issued franc, which acquired the status of legal tender in 1808. Already in 1781, before the conclusion of the War of Independence on the 11th of April 1783, Robert Morris, 1734 to 1806, Superintendent of Finance, introduced a bill which restored the new state to servitude with the establishment of the Bank of North America. This bank commenced operations on the 4th of January, 1782. It attracted large deposits of silver and gold coin and bills of exchange obtained through loans from France and the Netherlands, which enabled it to issue paper currency on the strength of these reserves. Between 1791 and 1796, inflation surged by 72%. In 1795, the state of Pennsylvania withdrew its jurisdiction on account of alarming foreign influence and fictitious credit. On the 25th of February, 1791, the Bank of North America was succeeded by a second central bank, which was chartered as the first bank of the United States. It was imposed as a result of the intrigues of Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, whose actions indicate that he was working hand in glove with the directors of the Bank of England, as it was modeled on that bank. The new bank had a capital of $10 million, of which 20% was held by the U.S. government and the balance by private investors. The bank was strongly opposed by future presidents John Adams, James Madison, and Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State, who would later state that the central bank is an institution of the most deadly hostility existing against the principles and form of our Constitution. I believe that the banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. Already they have raised up a moneyed aristocracy that has set the government at defiance. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers occupied. The following year, the bank organized the first crash known as the Panic of 1792. By flooding the market with cheap loans and suddenly calling most of them in, the bank precipitated a 25% plunge in the price of 6% Treasury bonds, which resulted in financial chaos. By the end of 1795, the bank had lent $6 million to government, or 60% of its capital. As the bank was allegedly concerned about the stability of government finances, it demanded partial repayment of this loan. The government did not have the funds available and was therefore forced to sell its shareholding in the bank between the years 1796 and 1802. By means of this cunning ruse, the bank became 100% privately owned, of which 75% of the shares were held by foreigners. In 1811, the bank's charter came up for renewal. The bank was concealing its profits, operating in a clandestine manner, and was believed to be unconstitutional. It was designed primarily to serve the business interests of the North at the expense of the agricultural development of the South, while the Democrats, Republicans, Jeffersonians wanted to abolish it. Former President Thomas Jefferson was one of those who violently opposed renewal of the bill. What particularly irked the legislators was the fact that the bank was now 100% in the ownership of foreigners. The press variously described the central bank bill as a great swindle, a vulture, a viper, and a cobra. Furthermore, they contended that it was the constitutional right of Congress to regulate weights and measures and issue coined money. The bill was defeated by a wafer-thin margin of 65 to 64 votes, which was an achievement, as there is a strong likelihood that many of the yes votes were bought. On the 3rd of March, 1811, the bank finally closed its doors. When the principal shareholder of the First Bank of the United States, Mayor Amschel Rothschild, heard about the deep dissension regarding the renewal of the bank's charter, he flew into a rage and declared that either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. He also said that, I will teach those impudent Americans a lesson and bring them back to colonial status. Rothschild tried to influence the British Prime Minister Spencer Perceval into declaring war on the United States in order to resurrect his privately owned central bank. In 1807, Perceval joined the cabinet as Chancellor of the Exchequer. At that time, England was at war with France, and one of his principal tasks was to raise money in order to finance the war. Instead of increasing taxes, he raised a number of loans, initially from the Barings Bank, and thereafter mainly from the Rothschilds. Perceval's secretary was John Charles Harries, who had been appointed to that position 5 years previously. Harries was an intimate of Nathan Rothschild, and until his death in 1858 faithfully served the Rothschild cause in the various positions he held in the British government as First Lord of the Treasury, Commissary General to the Army, and Chancellor of the Exchequer. Meanwhile, Rothschild agent provocateurs were stoking up discontent in North America. In order to provoke the Americans, the British started to interfere with U.S. trade with France, which had imposed a continental blockade against England. As the Royal Navy was short of sailors, they engaged in forced recruitment or impressment of American sailors. They also supplied the Indian tribes, and in particular the Shawnee chief Tecumseh, with arms in order to frustrate and curtail the settlers' westward expansion. The Americans, on their part, indicated a desire to seize parts of Canada. Concurrently, Percival was facing increased pressure from Nathan Rothschild to make a declaration of war on the United States.
800-951-0592. We have Canadian Maple Leafs for $9.85 a roll. We have Silver Eagles for $8.10 a roll. And we have $20 Liberties for $3,495. You got to call 800-951-0592. Jack, let's go right back into the content. A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson, a book that he wrote, and you can find this on YouTube. All the chapters, there's 8 chapters. It's quite a bit of material, but it's good information. Go ahead, Jack.
Was already bogged down in a stalemate situation in Spain and Portugal, the Peninsular War of 1808 to 1814, with Napoleon's forces, and he had no desire to commit more troops and treasure, financed by more interest-bearing bank loans, simply in order to save Rothschild's sinking banking interests in America. The assassin of Spencer Perceval, John Bellingham, was born about 1769 in St. Neots, Huntingdonshire. From 1800 to 1802, he worked in Archangelsk as an agent for importers and exporters. He returned to Russia in 1804, and in November of that year, he was falsely accused of having reneged on a debt of 4,890 rubles, which subsequently led to his imprisonment for 4 years. On his release, Bellingham took up residence in Duke Street, Liverpool. He unsuccessfully petitioned the government for compensation. Bellingham, a bitter and aggrieved man, fell into company with 2 dissolute American merchants, Thomas Wilson and Elisha Peck, who were both keen to have orders in council, which forbade neutral nations from trading with France, abrogated. These orders in council had been introduced by Perceval in response to Napoleon's continental blockade, which the latter had instituted in 1806 and prohibited trade with Britain and Ireland. Their continuation was due to be debated in Parliament on that fateful evening. Thus we observe a confluence of interests, a disturbed and resentful man, 2 greedy merchants, and the puppet master Rothschild pulling the strings in the background. At 5:15 p.m. on the 11th of May 1812, as Perceval entered the lobby of the House of Commons, Bellingham stepped forward and shot him in the heart. Perceval collapsed, uttering, "Murder! Oh my God!" and within minutes was dead. 4 days later, Bellingham was put on trial at the Old Bailey. The trial lasted 3 days. A plea of insanity was rejected. The brevity of the trial was presumably related to the necessity of preventing any untoward disclosures. As is customary with this type of political assassination, the lone assassin theory has to be preserved at all costs. On the 18th of May, 1812, Bellingham was hanged. A few weeks later, after Perceval's murder, the orders in council forbidding neutral nations trading with France were revoked. In the United States House of Representatives, Henry Clay, who was a Freemason, led a group of young Democratic Republicans known as the War Hawks. The vote to declare war was decided on the 1st of June, 1812, by 79 votes to 49, with all 39 Federalists voting to support it. In the Senate, the vote was decided by 19 to 13 votes. As there was no unanimity, critics frequently referred to it as Mr. Madison's War. In England, Perceval's successor, Lord Robert Liverpool, was an enthusiastic supporter of the war. However, neither belligerent was able to achieve its objectives, except Nathan Rothschild, who realized his aim of setting up the Second Bank of the United States on the 10th of April, 1816. When hostilities ceased over 2 years later, on the 24th of August, 1814, over 24,000 lives had been lost. The war was very costly to the United States in financial terms. It incurred a huge war debt of $105 million relative to its population of 8 million. As a result thereof, the national debt increased by 182%, from $45 million in 1812 to $127 million in 1815. Peace was signed in Ghent, Belgium, on the 24th of December, 1814. The Second Bank of the United States had an enlarged capital of $35 million. The bank immediately established a large number of branch banks to lend fiat money at compound rates of interest. In 1822, President James Monroe appointed Nicholas Biddle president of the bank. Biddle had first made contact with the Rothschilds while on government business in Paris in 1804, while acting as secretary to United States Minister to France, John Armstrong. As president of the bank, he acted as point man to James de Rothschild, who was the bank's principal investor. The artificially induced recession of 1819 to 1821, which was very profitable for the bankers who were able to buy up assets at depressed prices, convinced the leader of the Democrats, Andrew Jackson, that the only way to terminate these abuses was to close down the central bank. In his re-election campaign in 1832, he declared that the monster must perish, and his chief slogan was, "Vote Andrew Jackson, no bank." He stated that if Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given to them to be used by themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations. He also said that if the American people only understood the rank injustice of our banking and money system, there would be a revolution before morning. Notwithstanding a failed assassination attempt on the 30th of January, 1835, by a presumed Rothschild agent, Richard Lawrence, when the 20-year charter of the Second Bank of the United States came up for renewal in 1836, Jackson collapsed the bank by withdrawing all government deposits. He promptly repaid the national debt in its entirety, leaving a surplus of $50 million in the Treasury. The central bank was replaced by an independent Treasury system based on redeemable paper and specie. During President John Tyler's term of office, 1841 to 1845, 2 attempts were made by Congress under the sponsorship of the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Henry Clay, to renew the charter of the Bank of the United States. Clay, who had in 1820 become Grand Master of the Kentucky Lodge, was another agent deemed to be under the influence of the Rothschilds. Tyler vetoed both of these bills and was subsequently inundated with hundreds of letters threatening him with assassination. For the next 77 years, the United States developed without the need of a central bank. Its means of exchange were funded primarily by debt and interest-free Treasury greenback dollar bills, first issued by President Abraham Lincoln in 1862 in order to finance his military expenditure during the Civil War, and gold and silver coins. Up to 1873, gold and silver could be coined at any U.S. mint free of charge. After having rejected offers by private bankers to lend money to the United States government at interest rates varying between 24% and 36% per annum, Lincoln had, on the advice of his friend Colonel Dick Taylor, issued $347 million of currency at no cost to the American people except for the expense of printing and distribution. Lincoln's defiance of Lionel Rothschild and his uncle James resulted in his assassination on the night of the 15th of April, 1865, by John Wilkes Booth, real name Botha, at the behest of the Rothschilds' local agent named Rothberg. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, left the U.S. government with a war debt of $5 billion. As a result of inflation, these bonds had declined in value to $2.5 billion. Large quantities of these bonds were bought up by Rothschild's agent August Belmont in the hope of realizing them at their face value in gold. In the 1868 presidential election, the Democratic Party candidate, George H. Pendleton, pledged payment only in paper. He was soon replaced by Horatio Seymour on the initiative of Belmont, who had assumed chairmanship of the Democratic National Committee in 1860. Seymour promised payment in specie. However, when the convention passed a resolution in favor of paper, Belmont was forced to switch sides and thereafter secretly supported the Republican candidate, General Ulysses S. Grant, and used his part ownership of the New York World newspaper in order to denigrate and undermine the chances of Seymour. Grant won, and, on assuming office in 1869, he promptly introduced the Public Credit Act, which paid out the face value on the $5 billion worth of bonds in gold. This resulted in the Rothschilds and their associates making a 100% profit. The silver exchange was a...
Ulysses S. Grant, banker president. Didn't have that central bank yet, but we were slowly moving towards it after the Civil War. And we'll have more of this on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Patriot Radio News Hour. Gold and silver, give us a call, 800-951-0592. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Patriot Radio News Hour. Just a reminder out there that we are having our Texit meeting here at the radio station at 6 o'clock tonight. Texit is continuing to move forward, and we'll have more information at the meeting tonight, 6 o'clock here at the radio station. Joe's on vacation. He'll be gone. He's been gone, and he'll remain gone until next week. And I believe he'll be arranging another meeting there in Arizona because there's a lot to learn, and the more you guys understand it, the better it gets, because the more you operate in this space, the more beneficial it can be to you. So If you just want to sign up and just let that asset run, that's fine. You don't have to go to meetings. You can just stack up the Texas coins. But a lot of people that said they just wanted to get the asset are starting to learn about it a little bit and suddenly are wanting to sign people up and be more involved to gain more on the Texas coin opportunity. So you can stop by tonight. You can call me. You can, I think it's KHNC 1360 contact at AOL.com. You can email over here and set up an appointment with me if you'd like. If you can't make the meeting tonight, you can call me if you have my phone number, if you're one of my gold and silver customers here locally. And then, of course, the 800 number for gold and silver and for everything else in Arizona, 800-951-0592. We have Silver Canadian Maple Leafs, a roll of 25 for $9.85. We have rolls of Silver Eagles for $810 a roll. That was supposed to be ended today, but I'm gonna go one more day, one last day. Those are super cheap Silver Eagles. I mean, super, super cheap Silver Eagles. We have $20 Liberties for $3,495. You simply call 800-951-0592. Jack, let's continue on with a history of central banking.
Abolished and replaced by a gold standard by means of an act revising and amending the laws relative to the mints, assay offices, and the coinage of the United States. On the 17th of January, 1873, this act was passed by the Senate. According to a sworn affidavit of Mr. Frederick A. Luckenbach, dated the 9th of May, 1892, he had learnt from Mr. Ernst Sade in London that the demonetization of American silver had been expressly ordered by the governors of the Bank of England, who had furthermore paid £100,000, $500,000, in order to have a sufficient number of committee members of the U.S. Congress dealing with financial matters bribed. This nefarious deed became known as the Crime of 1873. The forced abandonment of the people's money, silver, was also instituted in the German Empire when the government inexplicably ceased to mint silver dollar coins in 1871. There seems to be little doubt that this was part of a synchronized scheme coordinated by the Rothschilds in order to further entrench the gold standard. The gold standard wrought havoc on the American economy and enabled private bankers to withhold loans and restrict the money supply at will. There followed a series of unnaturally created panics or bank runs in 1873, 1884, 1890-01, 1893-94, 1897, 1903, and 1907. These artificially created bank runs so incensed President James Abram Garfield that shortly after he took office on the 4th of March, 1881, he issued a statement in the middle of June of that year that he intended to master the problem when he said the following: "Whosoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate." 2 weeks later, Garfield was gunned down by lone assassin Charles J. Guiteau, who had a grievance for not having received a diplomatic posting. Garfield did not die immediately, but as a result of improper medical care, quite possibly done so deliberately, lingered on until his death on the 19th of September, 1881. At his trial, the hidden hand of Rothschild was revealed.
James Garfield,
Guiteau claimed that important men in Europe put him up to the task and had promised to protect him if he were caught. The 1907 panic had the worst effects. In early 1907, Jacob Schiff, CEO of Kuhn Loeb and Company, worried that unless we have a central bank with adequate control of credit resources, this country is going to undergo the most severe and far-reaching money panic in history. In October of that year, J.P. Morgan, another Rothschild frontman, set the panic in motion by circulating rumors that its rival, the Knickerbocker Bank and Trust Company, was insolvent. In the ensuing crash, shares listed on the New York Stock Exchange lost 50% of their value. Further consequences of this deliberately induced panic were an 11% drop in industrial production the following year, a 26% rise in imports, and an increase in unemployment from under 3% to 8%. It was these continual phases of artificially created boom and bust, inflation and deflation, which provided the motivation and pretext to set up a central bank, which would allegedly solve all these never-ending problems for all time. Establishment of the United States Federal Reserve Bank. In order to mislead the public, two alternative plans were proposed. One was advanced by the National Monetary Commission under leadership of Senator Nelson Aldrich, grandfather of Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, and known as the Aldrich Plan. The other plan, adopted by the Special Currency Committee of the New York Chamber of Commerce, was under the chairmanship of Paul Warburg, a German Jewish banker, who was acting on behalf of the Rothschild interests headed by Baron Alfred Rothschild. It was known as the Wall Street Plan, Except for the distribution of reserves, both plans were identical and had as their aim the establishment of a central reserve bank. On the 22nd of November, 1910, the banking conspirators included, among others, A. Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Frank Vanderlip, President of the National City Bank of New York, Henry P. Davidson, Senior Partner, J.P. Morgan and Company, Charles D. Norton, President, First National Bank of New York, Benjamin Strong, Vice President, Bankers Trust of New York, and Paul Moritz Warburg, Partner, Kuhn Loeb and Company, sneaked out of New York in Aldrich's Pullman car with all its blinds drawn from Hoboken, New Jersey railway station to Jekyll Island, Georgia. At the very exclusive Jekyll Island Hunt Club, owned by J.P. Morgan, the fate of the American people, and indeed the world, would be determined over the next 10 days by this group of criminally inclined financiers, who are also known as the First Name Club. Only first names were used so as not to reveal their identities to the staff. The bill to establish the United States Federal Reserve Bank was vehemently
We're into the Federal Reserve, Jack. Would you pause this?
August Lindbergh, who said that
Charles Lindbergh opposed the central bank. We're going to have a little bit more. We'll get a few more minutes of this on the other side of the break. We'll continue with this tomorrow. We're not even halfway through, so one of these days I'll have to do the back end of this thing, because last year when I did this, we never got through the whole thing. But lots of information, stuff that this is how I came to one of the ways I came to my conclusions on how this thing works. It's really well-packaged information, which is why I put it on once in a while. We'll be right back. Final segment here on the Patriot Radio News Hour on a Wednesday. I've said the title many times. I do it many times because I'm still getting texts. What is this? What is this that you're playing? Jack, I bet you could tell me what this is. What's the title of this thing?
The History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson.
Okay. I'll keep saying the title. I think I've been saying almost every. I know I'm getting people like, oh, I've heard the title. I know what it is, and I still got people saying, what is this? What is this? You can hear it on Monday. You can hear it on Tuesday's Gold Show. You can hear it on Wednesday's today's Gold Show. It'll be on tomorrow's Gold Show. I don't know about Friday. Friday will probably be more of a text and coin type of show. We'll see. But it is called The History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. That's not the narrator. It's the book writer. There is a book. I'm going to absolutely try to buy more copies of this if I can find time to just get on the computer and order it, because I had 20 copies of the book and sold right through it. And because it's a good read. It's not a hard read. It's an easily digestible volume, and it's got a lot of good information. Jack, let's put a couple more minutes of this on. One last time, we have Canadian Maple Leafs for $9.85 a roll. We have Silver Eagles for $8.10 a roll. These are our specials. If you go to allamericangold.com and look at the regular prices, your mouth's going to drop open, because all this stuff should be way more expensive. Everybody not ordering this stuff, you're just missing out on an outstanding price on all this. And then when gold goes up again, which it will continue to go up again, you'll wish you have bought some when it was lower. 800-951-0592. We have $20 Liberties also for $3,495. Jack, let's get about another 2 minutes of this on the air.
This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth, such as the Sherman Antitrust Act would dissolve if Congress did not by this act expressly create what by that act it prohibited. When the President signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the Pujo Money Trust investigation, will be legalized. The greatest crime of Congress is its currency system. The schemiest legislative crime of all ages is perpetuated by this new banking and currency bill. The bill was bitterly opposed in the Senate, with Senator Robert M. La Follette being one of its most vociferous opponents. It was passed into law on the 23rd of December, 1913, after the members of the Senate had been threatened by the thoroughly disreputable President Woodrow Wilson, who was as devoid of ethics and principle as he was of morality, that he would keep them in session until it had passed the bill and deny them their Christmas recess. Only a minority of 43 senators supported the bill, with 25 voting against it, 27 refusing to vote, and 5 members absent. The promoters of the bill promised that the United States dollar would become a stable currency and that business cycles and recessions would become a thing of the past. In the event since the inception of the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank in 1914, the U.S. dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power, and there have been 19 recessions, the Great Depression of the 1930s, and the current Great Recession, which started in 2008, and notwithstanding mainstream media propaganda to the contrary, appears to have all the symptoms of a depression. Since 1910, the national debt has increased from $2.65 billion to $20 trillion in March 2017, while unfunded liabilities such as Social Security, Medicare, and benefits for military veterans exceed $240 trillion.
We'll stop it there. We're coming to the end of the show. Hey, tomorrow we'll do a little bit more. Here it is, the title of this, A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. See you guys tomorrow on The Gold Show.